Now the fun begins. So we've learned the Hebrew consonants, we've learned the Hebrew letters, we've even learned a little bit about the accents. But now we're going to actually start learning the grammar of the language. So let's commence with Jonah 1:4. We're finally continuing in the book of Jonah. So let's see if we can pronounce this begin. I know we're past that, but it's worth still doing this a little bit. So this is Vadonai, or Vayave, if you want to say the name. Hetil Ruach Gadolah El Hayam Vayehi Sa'ar Gadol Bayam V'ha'aniyah Ha Hishava La Hishaver. Okay, so before we translate it, I want to teach 3 things in this video. Your first 3 grammar things. The first thing I want to teach you is this vav on the beginning of a word. There's a vav on the beginning of the word. Where's the vavs on the beginning of the word? There's a vav on the beginning of a word. Vav on the beginning of a word is always, as far as I can tell, there might be a minor exception, very minor exception, but almost always, when there is a vav on the beginning of a word, drum roll please, it is and. And so Hebrew is an and loving language. And so you're going to find and at the beginning of a lot of verses in the Old Testament. A lot of verses in the Old Testament begin with and. Hebrew loves and. So there's and, so Vayave, and Yahweh, Vayehi, and it was, and then we have Vaha'aniyah, and the boat. So you got and everywhere. So vav at the beginning of a word is and. Now, that's a little bit of a simplification because sometimes it's going to be better to translate it as but. Can even be then. It's not, don't be rigid because it's not a one-to-one with English, okay? We got to flex a little bit. We got to learn to be flexible, a little gummy in us. So actually when vav is on a noun like this, Yahweh, it might almost be but Yahweh, a contrastive kind of situation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What you want to know after this video is that vav at the beginning of a word almost without exception means and, okay? So vav, and. You've learned your first word in Hebrew. Notice that it's attached too. And is not separated from the word. And never, and never stands on its own in Hebrew. It's attached. It's like a pileup on I-69. You know, the cars have crashed into each other. In fact, part of the detective work of Hebrew is figuring out, let's see, where does this one car end and the next car begin? So vav is what's called a separable prefix. Not that it can stand on its own and be separated on its own, but it's a separate meaning bit. It's a morpheme, if you would. Not morphine, that'll kill you. Anyway, so vav at the beginning of a word is and. First thing to learn in this video, and. The second thing to learn is that there are some other separable prefixes like prepositions. Prepositions are relationship words. In the house, Ken's in the house. But at the beginning of a word is often, not always, sometimes, hey, that's not a wig, that's my real hair. You know, like the verb create in Genesis 1:1, bara means he created. It's not a preposition. So sometimes a bet at the beginning of a word is a real bet. I'm a real bet. But in bayam here, in the sea, all of that little bayam means in the sea. They're like 3 meaning bits there. And the ba is the in. So ba at the beginning of a word, a bet at the beginning of a word can mean in. Again, don't tie it down to just the word in. It can mean with, among, so there's a flexibility to ba. But 2 things you've learned, 2 meaning bits of the language, v, and at the beginning of a word, ba or va is in. And then the third thing I want to expose you to is that the normal way of saying the is hey, patak, and the doubled next letter. So let me see, I think we have one here, don't we? Yeah. hayam. Where is that at? Right here. So hey, patak, doubled letter. Yam, yam is the C. Yam, I love the C. Anyway, yam is C. Hayam is the C. How do I know the? Because the hey, the patak, and the doubled next letter, the. And so the normal way to do, again, it's a separable prefix. It's not yam. It's a different word than yam. You can separate the words out, but it is never on its own. You will never find a ba all by itself, meaning in Hebrew. It doesn't happen. And you'll never find the all by itself, meaning the. It's always attached or crashed into a word. So this hey, patak doubling is the. The three things to learn in this video. The means and at the beginning of a word. Ba means in at the beginning of the word. And hey, patak doubling is often, if not always, the at the beginning of a word. You've learned three things, three meaning bits in Jonah 1:4. Well, let's go ahead and translate it. You don't need to know everything, but let's go ahead and translate it. But Yahweh, and I translate it as but, it is and, but normally and is on a verb at the beginning of a word. So the fact that it's on a noun suggests it might be contrastive. But Yahweh, he hurled a ruach gadolah, a great wind. Ruach, by the way, is the word for spirit. Breath, spirit, wind, it's a fluid sense of things. The breath in us, the ruach, God breathed into Adam and he became a living soul. The breath in us, the spirit in us, it's the breath of God. Ecclesiastes, when we die, does our breath go back to God who gave it to us in the first place? Anyway, little theology of wind there, or spirit in the Old Testament. Hebrew, ruach. But Yahweh caused a great wind to hurl. He hurled a great wind to the sea. There's the sea there, Hayam. And it was, Vayehi, and it was, there's and again, Sa'ar Gadol, a great tempest. We're going to come back to this verse a little bit later. What's the difference between Gadolah, which means great, and Gadol, that means great? What's the difference? It sounds like the same word. It is the same word. It's just that it's an adjective. Here it goes with a feminine word because spirit is feminine in Hebrew, and here it goes with masculine word. You don't need to know that. We'll cover this in a later video. Anyway, so I can't stop myself, can I? In the sea. And it was a great tempest on the sea. On is probably better. There's ba, meaning on. And the boat, ha'aniya, and the boat, there's a the, we'll talk about this is a slightly different version of the. The boat thought to be broken. It said, should I break or should I not break? Hebrew's very poetic. I'm thinking about breaking up here. The boat thought about being broken. Very interesting. By the way, lamed is another preposition. It means to. But more on this later. We're not going to try to learn everything all at once. That would overwhelm you. Three things I want you to take from this video. The means and at the beginning of a word, like the, Yahweh. Ba means in at the beginning of a word, or on, bayam. And then the article in its default form is hey, patak, doubling. Okay, you got it? Just for those of you who have extra brain space, let me tell you a couple other details of this verse, but you don't need to know this yet. I'll just tell you over and over again until you learn it despite yourself. So gutturals, there are four guttural letters in Hebrew. They are aleph, ayin, hey, and chet. These letters don't do doubling. They're like, that's not in my contract. I don't double. I refuse to double. I'm a guttural. And so this is the boat here. And the hey, what's the normal form of the article? Article is the word the. What's the normal form? It's hey, patak, doubling. And so the hey and a vowel, and it tried to double the aleph, and the aleph says, I don't do doubling. I don't do doubling. The hey tried to shoot its dagesh into the aleph, and it bounced off and ricocheted and made a patak into a kamatz. That makes no sense at all, but anyway, it's kind of fun, right? Pyong, and the patak became a kamatz. We call that compensatory lengthening. It's a fancy word. That when an aleph and an ayin won't do doubling, the patak says, well, fine, I'm just going to lengthen then. So there are some different versions of hey patak doubling, some different versions of the that we'll see as we get into the book of Jonah. The one you need to know for this video is hey patak doubling, but there is sometimes the hey will lengthen the vowel because the aleph says, I'm not doubling. I don't care what you say. I'm not doing it. Fine. I'll just lengthen my vowel. So again, if you don't understand, the three things are what you need to take away from this. One more thing I'm going to try to squeeze in here, that there is a hidden patak doubling here in the C. Remember I said this was in the C? We had the C up here, hayam, and then we have in the C, bayam, down here. Well, you can see that the letters are very similar. The yam is the same of the C, and the patak is the same, and the doubling is the same. And the bait I know is in. So what happened to the hey? What the hey? What happened to the hey? Well, it's like a pimple. It pops out when you put a preposition. You have a it's like a train, right? You got preposition, hey, word, and when you put the b on the hey word, the hey pops out and goes away. So the hey has been squeezed out, and all that's left. The only thing that lets you know that there's a the here is the patak doubling. We've got in, patak doubling, and a yam. Again, if you don't, so what's he talking about? Don't worry about it, because we will see this over and over again, and then what is hard today will be easy tomorrow. This has been Jonah 1:4.